cares and loves about all people. That it's not the idea of universalism versus particularism. And we will briefly touch on the context of the post-exilic period, where Jonah can be seen, along with the book of Ruth, as the first Jew by choice, Ruth being that person, in both of these books as statements in opposition to what they saw, or some people saw, as the kind of narrow restrictiveness of Ezra and the governor Nehemiah, where the declaration was that these mostly males who returned from exile, it was maybe 800, 1,000 miles they had to travel to come back to Judah. And, you know, it was a dangerous trip. It was a difficult trip, and the women didn't make it. So these guys are without wives, and they marry local women, and of whom Ruth could be seen as one of them. And then Ezra comes as the religious leader, along with Nehemiah, in the 400s BCE, and declares, that's no good. You have to divorce your wives. And that certainly created horrible problems. But Ezra was worried that Judaism would once again become so diluted. So here's, it's a real problem. Now, that being said, let us look at the chapters, and I would ask for a volunteer to read it. But as we're reading this, look at it carefully. Look for inconsistencies. Look to see what it's really saying. And then we'll unpack each chapter briefly. Do I have a volunteer? Tom, would you like to read? Tom Pick, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. I will read the chapter 1. And the word of Adonai came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim against it, for their evil deeds have risen up before me. But Jonah got up to flee to Tarshish, away from the presence of Adonai. And he went down to Jaffa and found there a ship heading to Tarshish. And he paid his fare and went down into it to head with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of Adonai. But Adonai hurled a great wind upon the sea, a storm at sea so great the ship was in danger of being shattered to pieces. And the sailors were frightened. They cried out, each to his own god, and flung the ship's cargo into the sea to lighten their load. But Jonah had gone down into the hold, the lower deck of the vessel, and he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. And the captain approached him and said to him, what are you doing sound asleep? Get up, call to your God. Perhaps the God will be kind to us and we will not perish. And they said, each man to his companion, let us cast lots, and that we might know on whose account this evil event has come to us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. And they said to him, tell us, you who have brought this evil upon us, what is your trade and where have you come from? What is your country and who are your people? And he said to them, I revere Adonai, God of heaven, who made sea and dry land. The men felt great fear, and they asked him, what have you done? Because the men knew that he was fleeing from Adonai, for so he had told them. And they asked, what should we do to you to bring calm to the sea around us? For the sea was growing more and more stormy. So he said to him, lift me up and hurl me into the sea, and the sea will calm down for you. For I know that this great storm came upon you because of me. And the crew rowed hard to return to dry land, but they could not do it, for the sea was raging more and more fiercely around them. And they called out to Adonai, saying, Please, Adonai, do not let us perish because of the life of this man, and do not hold us guilty of shedding innocent blood. For you, Adonai, that which you desire, you have brought about. And they lifted Jonah and hurled him into the sea. Then the sea stopped raging. The men revered Adonai. Great was their reverence. So they offered to Adonai a sacrifice and made vows.
Beautifully read. Thank you so much. Read with great feelings. That's such a simple chapter, is it? Jonah obviously is in Eretz Israel. He's on home turf. And God tells him, you've got to go to Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrians, the capital of the arch enemy that many of the prophets had railed against. The country that 2 decades later will destroy the northern kingdom. And he says, and go and tell them that they have sinned greatly. Now, God wants them to repent. But does Jonah? There's no indication that Jonah wants them to heed his message. In fact, it seems that Jonah is fearful that they will listen to him. And he would end up, as he does at least on the surface, being the most successful of all the prophets. And he doesn't want that. So he says, I don't want to do the job. I'm going to make tracks from here. And there is some speculation where Tarshish was. The most likely place was on the eastern coast of Spain. And Nineveh is north of Syria in what would be Iraq today. So, I mean, it's going in the opposite direction. There's also a possible place on that coast in the southern coast of Turkey, but that's much more unlikely. So he wants to get away. He is afraid that people will listen. So he flees. He's avoiding responsibility. Or if you put it in terms of this morning's Torah portion, he's saying, you have the blessing and the curse. And he doesn't choose the blessing. He wants to avoid that at all costs. I mean, in a sense, if you think about it, the book of Jonah, or the character of Jonah, is the complete opposite, the complete antithesis of what Yom Kippur is about. It's about making the wrong choice. And it's about rejecting the whole concept of repentance and forgiveness. So he flees. And then they're on the ship when we look at this, and he's fine with it. I mean, he just goes to sleep. He goes down. There are all kinds of midrashim and speculation about the nature of the ship. I remember reading one that said when the storm attacked the ship, the storm was only above the ship, and the waters were calm everywhere. And I've got to just inject a little bit of levity here. I'm reminded of a story that a minister friend of mine in Chicago told me many, many years ago. And he said that 2 men were painting the roof of a church, and they were using a white latex paint. And they were up on there, and they realized they were running a little bit short of paint. So they decided to dilute it a little bit, add a little bit of water to it and stretch out the paint. And it's a beautiful sunny day. And as they're getting right to where the ladder was, there's just a small amount on the roof, and one of the two men steps down onto the ladder. It starts getting cloudy above them, and the second man is on the ladder, and he paints the last little bit as he starts to go down the ladder, and it's very dark, it's very threatening, and the minute the second of the painters sets foot on the ground, the sky opens up, and and a downpour ensues. It washes all of the paint off the roof. And even 100 yards away, it's sunny. Very much like the Midrash on Jonah. And as soon as all the paint's off the roof, the rain stops and a voice comes booming from the heaven. And you may not forgive me for this. And it says, "Repaint ye thinner and thin no more." Repaint ye thin. Well, Jonah was the thinner, and I'm not sure he ever does repent, but it just struck me that it goes with this. And then what about this casting of lots? This was a way of figuring out who was culpable, who caused this. And of course, the lots fell on Jonah, and he said, "I'm a Hebrew." And they knew that the Hebrew was were a people that had come from far away, the Habiru, the wandering Aramaeans we have in the Haggadah. And they weren't totally surprised. But the problem here was something else. They were on water. They were in the Mediterranean. They were not in any territory. And the gods of the ancient times were territorial. There was a god of Florida, there was a god of Georgia, god of Alabama, and so on. And when you crossed the border, you paid your respects to the god there. And you get inklings of that in the story of Jacob fleeing and in other places. So they knew that it was Jonah who was fault, but they also recognized that this God was beyond the territory of Jonah's homeland, of Israel. And that the God of Israel, Jonah's God, somehow had jurisdiction here everywhere. So these pagans, who are really described as almost innocent pagans, recognize that this was the real God who counted. And they began worshiping and offering sacrifices to God. It also said in some of the commentaries, before Jonah was cast into the sea, they, threw baggage and cargo into the sea so that they could lighten the load as much as possible. And then only at the last resort, and you can see this in the text too, were they willing, would they even consider Jonah? And Jonah says, "I'm the cause of this. You're going to have to throw me into the sea or you're going to die." And they don't want to do this. He's a human being. These sailors are the heroes of the first chapter. Jonah's the villain here. He's the bad guy. And so finally, though, they do cast him in the sea, and immediately the waters subside. And then we have the beginning of the second chapter. So it's a very interesting chapter. And so at this point, we come to Jonah's prayer. And if you'll notice in chapter, the beginning, in chapter 1, it provides the intro. And in verses 1 and 2, that part I'm going to read, and then I want to ask someone who'll be willing to read this, which I would point out is a collection of lines or verses from throughout the Psalms. I'm not going to go through which Psalm they were, but I did get that. I do have that information here. And so Jonah So God sends it's not a whale, it's a dag gadol. It's a big fish. A whale would be probably Leviathan in Hebrew, Leviathan. And the fish, he's sinking down, the fish swallows him up, and he's inside the fish. So someone would be willing to read this poem. Do we have a volunteer? Okay. Is it Ron or Barbara?
Ron.
Okay, please. This is
Okay.
poetry, remember, but it's okay.
Right. And he said, I called to Adonai in my distress, and God answered me. I cried out from the belly of the netherworld, and you heard my voice. Into the depths you cast me, into the heart of the sea, and the floods engulfed me. All your billowing, breaking waves swept over me. Waves, rather. And I thought to myself, I was banished from before your eyes. Will I ever again gaze upon your holy temple? The waters closed in over me. The deep engulfed me. Rushes wrapped around my head. I descended to the low point of the mountains. The gates of the earth closed upon me forever. Yet you, Adonai, my God, raised up my life from the pit. When my life fainted away, I called Adonai to mind, and my prayer came to you, to your holy temple. They who cling to empty folly forsake their own welfare. But I, with a shout of thanksgiving, I will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will fulfill. Rescue comes from Adonai. Adonai commanded the fish, and it spewed forth Jonah out upon dry land.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now, Jonah's sinking down. He figures he's dying. He figures a part of him, maybe a little guilt, that he is running from God and this is just punishment. And then he gets swallowed by the fish, somehow is providing oxygen for him to breathe, etc., whatever. And he realizes that he's sinking to the depths, literally and figuratively. I mean, this is really, I mean, he's hitting bottom here in a lot of ways. So he acknowledges that God's in control, that what is happening to him, but he's not saying, I deserve this. He's saying, this is what's happening to me. And there doesn't seem to be any remorse, any regret, any repentance on his part. And you could also say it's in his enlightened self-interest to ask God for help. I mean, that's his only place he can turn. So he says, well, I guess you got me. You know, I'm kind of a prisoner of the situation. Okay, God, I'm going to do what you want. And I'm going to pass on your message as you had instructed me. But there's no sign of remorse or repentance here whatsoever. And it's, you know, it's as if he's saying the right words. My father once described some clergy as ecclesiastical mechanics. He's being a prophetic mechanic here. He's saying what he's supposed to say, but probably doesn't believe it and still fearful that maybe he's going to have to do what he doesn't want to do. And then at the end, the fish spews him out on dry land, probably along the coast of Syria, and he makes his way inland to Nineveh. Okay, we have someone else who would be willing to read chapter 3.
I will. I'm Jody. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Jody. Go for it.
And the word of Adonai came up to Jonah a second time. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and call out to it the proclamation that I tell you. So Jonah got up and went to Nineveh, according to the word of Adonai. Now Nineveh was a great city of God, 3 days' journey across. And Jonah started out and made his way into the city, the distance of a 1-day walk. And he called out and said, 40 more days and Nineveh shall be overturned. The people of Nineveh trusted in God, and they proclaimed a fast. And they put on sackcloth from the richest to the poorest. And the word reached the king of Nineveh, and he got up from his throne, took off his robe, put on sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he cried out and said in Nineveh, by decree of the king and his nobles, no person or beast, of flock or herd, shall taste anything. They shall not graze, and they shall not drink water. They shall be covered with sackcloth, person and beast, and shall call loudly to God. Let all turn back from their evil ways and from the violence which is in their hands. Who knows? God may turn and relent, turn back from the heat of anger, so that we do not perish. God saw what they did, how they were turning back from their evil ways, and God relented from the evil planned for them and did not carry it out.
Fantastic. Well done, and thank you so much. Take a look at, now what we have here, okay, I'm going to point out a number of things that I jotted down, I think, because we're also at the point now where we have about less than 20 minutes we need to finish up. The city is described as 3 days across. That couldn't be. The city may have been in excess of 100,000 people, but when we talk about Nineveh, you could replace it with other great pagan cities. It was just as Jonah is a work of fiction here, Nineveh was used because it fit, because it was an empire that had destroyed the northern kingdom, and Nineveh was the capital. But it could also have been Babylon, it could have been Ur, it could have been other places in the Fertile Crescent. And they, over 2,000 years, they played a game of kind of like musical empires. One would come, it would be in power for a century or 2 or 3. It would be in another area in that Fertile Crescent, a city-state would become very powerful. They would consolidate their forces and they would destroy the empire in charge, and they would become the empire in charge. And later we have the Neo-Babylonians, we have the Persians, and then in 332, it was Alexander the Great who conquered that whole area and died shortly thereafter. And then his empire was split up. The Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in the east there, the Macedonians in Greece, and an area just north of there as well. So this could be any one of these cities. And Jonah here is the false prophet par excellence. And take a look at verse 4. And I found an interesting commentary here. Make sure I have the right spot. Yeah, okay. That we look at this and look what it says. Jonah started out, made his way into the city, 1 day's walk, and said, 40 more days and Nineveh shall be overturned. Now, when we see the word overturned, we think of being destroyed, but it could also be the very opposite of that, that it could be turned around, and that hafuk is opposite in modern Hebrew, and it will turn over. And by turning over, it will turn over a new leaf, reform itself. So, and there is this vagueness in the text here. So there is that possibility. So then Jonah's worst fears are realized. You know, the people repented, and the repentance went all the way up to the king, who got off his throne, put on sackcloth, sat in ashes, and he cried out by decree, no person, not even an animal, no flock, no herd, shall taste anything. They shall fast. No grazing, no drinking of water. I mean, they made Yom Kippur to the nth degree in Nineveh, or so it tells us here. And let us all turn back from our evil ways. Now, they didn't know if God would forgive them. The message, the possibility of repentance isn't even in Jonah's message. All he does is said, this is God's decree, you're going to catch it. And this is consistent with the first chapter, Jonah. And he made his proclamation, but there's no Rahmanas, there's no mercy, there's no compassion, there's nothing here. It's just a declaration that they're going to be destroyed. And in this story, the heroes really are the people of Nineveh. They're the people who realize that this God that Jonah is in some way representing, is in charge in Nineveh, just as God was in charge on the sea. This is a God that is universal, a God of the whole world as they know it. And this idea of a universal God comes in with second Isaiah. There's 3 Isaiahs. The first one is to chapter 39, who was the Isaiah who lived at the time of around 701, when the Assyrians were laying siege to Jerusalem. And he told the people, don't make an alliance with Egypt, that will seal your doom. Only make an alliance with God, trust in God as your only ally, and God will save you. And then we learn from Herodotus that the siege of Jerusalem was suddenly lifted because a plague attacked the camp of the Assyrians. Their numbers were decimated and they left. And then Judah became a vassal state from that point, 701, until 586, when Judah was conquered and destroyed and people were taken exile. But second Isaiah was chapters 40 to 56 in second Isaiah, and is very important in Christian teaching because the suffering servant has been seen as Jesus. I believe that the suffering servant was Israel itself going through a period of purification in Babylonia. And then they come back after the decree of Cyrus. But this is a very interesting period here. So God repents. God saw what they were doing. He turned away. He recognized their repentance. And then we have the culmination of the book, and we need to, like somebody to read chapter 4. Do we have? Marcia, you want to do it? Or wait, yeah, you're here. Okay, go for it.
Okay, thank you. But to Jonah, this was a great evil, and it made him angry. So he prayed to Adonai, saying, please, Adonai, is this not what I said when I was still in my own country? This is why I fled to Tarshish to begin with. For I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, endlessly patient and abounding in steadfast love, ready to repent of evil. And now, Adonai, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. And Adonai said, is it good for you to be angry? Then Jonah left the city, found a place east of the city, made himself a shelter there, and sat under it in the shade until he might see what would become of the city. And Adonai Elohim provided a gourd and made it rise up over Jonah to give shade for his head and rescue him from his evil situation. And Jonah rejoiced with great joy because of the gourd. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm that attacked the gourd, and it withered. And as the sun rose, God provided an oppressive wind from the east, and the sun beat down on Jonah's head, making him faint. He begged for death, saying, "It is better for me to die than to live." Then God said to Jonah, "Are you good and angry about the gourd?" And he said, "I am good and angry to the point of death." Then Adonai said, "You pitied the gourd, which you neither worked for nor grew, which appeared overnight and perished overnight. Should I then not have compassion for the great city of Nineveh, a place of more than 120,000 human beings, unable to tell their right hand from their left, and many beasts?"
Thank you so much. Well done. Look at this. So Jonah is horribly upset because what he feared is coming about. The people have repented. And he also feared that God would accept this repentance and forgive them. This was not part of his narrow-minded mentality. So he says, I don't want any part of this. So in a sense, he flees from God again. So he goes out the eastern side of the city, and he parks himself by the wall, and he must have gone out in the latter part of the day because he's got shade, and it's not so bad. If he went out in the morning, he would have been miserable, and what happens the next day would have happened then. So he is there. Now, when he talks in that second verse, for he says, "I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, endlessly patient and abounding in steadfast love, ready to repent of evil." Those words are lifted from chapter 34 of Exodus. What's the context? Moses comes down from the mountain. The people are worshiping the golden calf or whatever the animal was. Moses is furious, and God wants to destroy the people. And Moses speaks these words to God, reminding God of his qualities. And at that instant, it started thundering outside. So maybe there's a message there. And God, Moses is bargaining with God for the sake of the Jewish people. He said, "You can't leave us now. You know, we're human. We did something wrong, but you got to stick with us here. We're in the middle of nowhere." And so the author not only had given us all kinds of beautiful passages from the Psalms and put them together, indicating that he really, the author knew his stuff, but here he's quoting from Exodus. And I don't think Jonah meant a word of it. This man is just saying that because he now realizes he's vulnerable once again. And he may have realized that God, at one occasion, when he was in the fish and having the fish swallow him, was merciful and compassionate to Jonah, even though Jonah knew in his heart of hearts he didn't deserve it. So once again here, we have this situation, and Jonah says, "I want to die." But does Jonah really want to die? He's fine there that evening, but the next morning, if you've been in Israel, you would know what a chamsin is, that hot, dry winds, and I'm sure Jim knows, has experienced. It is brutal. I remember arriving in Israel as a student in 1965 and in the middle of a chamsin, and I never felt such intense dry heat without a cloud in the sky. And I imagined that, I remembered that every time I would read this passage. So the next morning, Jonah knew it was going to be brutal and impossible because the sun rose in the east. So God causes this gourd to grow. The gourd is wonderfully protective with its wide leaves. We're not sure what exactly the gourd was, but some kind of flowering plant. And then God sends the worm to kill the gourd. And look how upset Jonah is. How could you do this? And God says, you're angry about the gourd, and you didn't even have anything to do with creating it. I created it. So you're worried about something that you didn't create. Shouldn't I, as the God of the world, care about my living creatures in Nineveh and by extension everywhere? And I think that's one of the key lessons here. And we get it. We understand what is trying to be said here, that this is not a narrow-minded approach, but this is a broad, accepting, universalistic approach. This is really the message of the key message of the book here, that God cares about all our creatures. And as just an aside, the rabbis developed the Noahide laws, the 7 laws of the sons of Noah. And these are laws that apply to all people. And they don't say anything about idolatry. Create laws in courts of justice. No blasphemy, no cursing God. No, what does it is opposed to idolatry. But they later broaden the interpretation so that Christianity is not considered idolatry, because we lived often in Christian lands. There were certain sexual practices prohibited. You could not just commit bloodshed, although killing in self-defense was different. This is murder. No theft, no kidnapping like that, and no eating flesh from a live animal. They would have some real problems with when you take a claw off. Is it a lobster or a crab? I can't.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah, we're running out of time.
About 5 minutes.
Okay. So what we have, yeah, I'm watching in front of me too. So this is a message of universalism. It also shows in very glaring terms the contrast between a God of justice and a God of mercy. And the God of Israel is not a God of justice, but a God of justice tempered by mercy. And in later centuries, this was made to seem like there was a huge contrast between Christianity and Judaism, which it's a matter of degree, I think. And also that God is not immutable. God is capable of change. When Moses lobbied with God for his people, God changed, in quotes, his mind. And here too, God sends him to condemn the Ninevites, but then accepts their genuine repentance. So there are many messages here. I apologize for not having the time for discussion, but I have about 40 pages of stuff that I took out and wrote down and outlined. And there's just so much here. I hope it gives you some food for thought. And I hope in the future, when you read this, you will think about it in its total context. And I thank you for the opportunity to be with you. I hope it challenged you to think a little bit particularly about things you may not have looked at before. And I thank you.
Rabbi, thank you very much for your presentation. Happy New Year to you and Marilyn. In about 8 minutes, Rabbi Raskin will be coming on with his presentation, and look forward to seeing you all then.
So to everyone, if you haven't seen, if you want the handout from Rabbi Raskin, it's in the additional resources section of the High Holiday part of the website.
Right.
Scroll down for Life After Life, and you can bring up Rabbi Raskin's quote handout.
And for everybody, we're staying on the same Zoom call. We're not switching off to another code. So you have a couple seconds if you need to do anything. Now's the time. And then we'll wait for Rabbi Raskin. And then when he's finished, I just want to go over very quickly the Torah portion for this afternoon. And I'll jump off at about 10 minutes of 5 of 4, so I can meet the cantor and we can get ready for going back at 4 o'clock on the live stream for Yisker. And don't forget the tissue box.
Awfully quiet.
But it's muted.
I don't think we're muted.
Unmute yourself if you're muted.
Yeah, Rabbi Goodman.
Yes. I'm sorry I didn't get
Make
to you.
a couple of comments on Nineveh. My son was on 7 deployments to that area. That is the modern Mosul, Iraq. And
Right.
the ancient Nineveh archaeological site was pretty much totally destroyed in 2016 by ISIL, just for your information. But it is there near Mosul.
Wow.
Figuring around.
Rabbi Goodman, Goldie posted in the chat, do the people of Nineveh recognize that they have sinned? Have they sinned, or is that immaterial to the story's lesson? That's what Goldie asked.
Okay, I think from what I read in a lot of sources, they recognized that they individually had done evil. They had performed evil acts of Hamas, and that, but there were innocent people among them, children, the animals were innocent, and it wasn't a matter of punishing all of them, but they, from the king on, they took the lead from the king and they genuinely repented. And so I think the case of the sailors, I think that they were simpler people, but this was a nasty place in a lot of ways. And they did a lot of nasty things. Empire builders seem to be that way, and they don't do it out of kindness. I see it. Look at that. There you are. So yeah, I think that's hopefully that would be my response to Goldie's question. But it was a wonderful opportunity for me to really read and think and think and think. And I think it's good for all of us. Great thing, and I think Rabbi Address would agree, one of the real great fringe benefits of being in our profession is we get to study on the job.
Yes,
We
it's
get to grow and learn and keep doing it. And
it's true. You have to.
and being in my capacity here, I have much more time than I ever had in forever.
Well, thank you again. And it's nice to see Rabbi Raskin. He's on my screen on the bottom right-hand column. So how you doing? And Happy New Year. And you're muted, Fred. So, but whatever. And we're just waiting for, you know, I don't know whether Gene muted everybody or everybody can
Should be able to.
unmute yourself.
We can unmute ourselves.
Okay.
Everybody can unmute themselves. We're going to be going live with Rabbi Raskin in about 3 minutes. And Rabbi Raskin, just as a caution, or not a caution, but just so you know, at about 5 minutes before your 5 minutes before your session's over, I will be letting you know that you have 5 minutes left.
Great.
Stay with me.
Gene,
Yes.
is Rabbi Address there?
I'm here.
He's
I'm here.
Good. I wanted to send a little private chat to you, but I think I'm technologically deficient. So I'm just going to do this publicly. I enjoyed, and Judy was with me, the morning service so much.
Oh, thank
It
you.
was
Thank you very much.
inspiring, your sermon, this management, your comments. I used the text, the pulpit text I used my last year at Bet Yom. And so there were little pencil markings, and you did 90% of what I did. So you did a great service. It was very meaningful for us.
Oh, thank you very much.
And Harry was pretty good too.
You really must thank her, because the technology of the choir, them, and really the sight and sound people, I really, they are so professional. And because I know what a lot of my colleagues are going through, because the last 3 months, it's all anybody's talked about. And I will tell you, to walk in and have everything that they did put together seamlessly. We had a couple of rehearsals just to put blocking out camera angles and stuff and sound checks. But and I'm technologically challenged, very much so. So they pulled it together very well. And you really have to thank your cantor, because the stuff that she did with them, and really the chorale and the way those videos came up. And all I can tell you is wait till what we're going to try something out in Yisker, and that Carrie and I have been working on for a while, and we're very excited about it. Actually, I think it was bizarre because we're more excited about the Yisker service than any of the other services. But we'll see. And she had this great idea when we were talking about how to format certain things, and I hope it speaks to you in a very powerful way.
I hope so. I will say this, it just occurred to me, we're here and I was visiting our Bet Yom for a service for Rosh Hashanah. The days of creative services back in the 70s and 80s, and then we said, that's passe. We're going to a more traditional structured service, a liturgy reform or whatever.
Right.
Now it seems we've gone, due to necessity, to improvising and doing different things in different ways. And so while nobody's happy with this, on the other hand, there are some blessings that have come out of it. I think that's one of them.
No, you haven't seen anything yet. When this is over, and what's happening in congregations now with the technology and people coming forward, worship is going to be so significantly different in the next several years because of what people have been forced to do in order to reach people. And yes, I remember the old days at camp and youth grouping of creative services, where you'd say, oh, thank you, God, for the tree. It really is nice for you and me. And then we would sing a song, and that would be the creatives, that would be the creative service. It's a lot different than it was, thank God.
Excuse me, rabbis, it's time for Rabbi Raskin. You have your session. Will the people attending please mute your microphone and enjoy the discussion? Raise your hand if you wish to talk. And Rabbi Raskin, do you have the participants portion on the side of your screen so you can see if anybody has their hands raised?
No, but I will do that. However, let me begin and just say I'm going to have to, like Rabbi Goodman, limit some questions because of the scope of what we're doing. So I'm going to ask you to hold them, though it's a couple of points, I may take a couple of questions. And there should be time at the end. However, that's the bad news. The good news is that I've arranged to take the next wisdom, which is a week from Tuesday, a week from tomorrow at 10:30. And there'll be a different phase of this, but I've allowed a lot of time. So if anyone has questions or wants to think about it or wants to come back to it, there will be ample opportunity next Tuesday. So that's my game plan. So we'll get as much done as we can, but I will probably have to hold off on a lot of questions or take one or two and cut it off then. So let me get started, that having been said. Life between life, exploring Jewish reincarnation. In recent session of wisdom on the 15th, I presented different the Jewish views of afterlife. And we explored briefly how reincarnation is one part of Jewish belief. Today, I'm taking a different tack. I want to revisit reincarnation not from the view of rabbis and theologians and philosophers, but from the perspective of clinicians, psychologists, psychiatrists, MDs. This is very unusual stuff. 1982, Raymond Moody wrote a book, Life After Life. Credentials, Raymond Moody earned a PhD in philosophy. He earned a PhD in psychology, and he had an MD. He wasn't dumb. He coined the phrase near-death experience, arguing that officially deceased patients reported experience that suggested afterlife. Most medical colleagues were skeptical, critical, or outraged. Moving on. The renowned Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, MD, she, if you remember her name, created the model of the classic 5 stages of grief: DABDA, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But in 1984, she wrote On Life After Life, based on her experiences with 20,000 dying patients. She confirmed Moody's findings on near-death experience. Again, most MDs then and probably today and psychiatrists vehemently reject these ideas as non-clinical. Earlier on, however, a Dr. Ian Stevenson, and these are some of the most prominent names in this community of thought, and there are others. He was chair of the University of Virginia, the medical school's psychiatry department chair. He authored these titles, among others, 20 cases suggestive of reincarnation. This is back in 1966. Reincarnation and Biology, 1997, is another one along those lines. And this one's really interesting. Children Who Remember Past Lives, 1987. Controversial, to say the least, but hard to just simply dismiss out of hand. Another name, Brian Weiss. Brian studied at Columbia and Yale University Medical School. He had an internship in internal medicine at NYU, plus a 2-year psychiatry residence at Yale. He became head and was there for many years, head of psychiatry at Miami's Mount Sinai Medical Center. Since 1980, he began discussing the past life experiences of 4,000 patients. I'm going to stop and just make this little parenthetical comment. We're all following polls these days, political polls, surveys of what people like and want to do. And you read the statistics on them, and they're based on the 900 or 1,000. 4,000, 20,000 cases, I think, are a little bit more substantive than just several hundred. So I wanted to point that out. And he said, quote, his technique was hypnotic regression therapy. The idea that through hypnosis, you can go deep enough to go beyond the what we call subconscious. Hypnotic regression therapy can have a curative effect on many phobias and ailments that are rooted in past life experience when acknowledged by the patient, unquote. He is convinced of the survival after death of an element of the human personality. And in 2008, Eben Alexander, MD, this is a very interesting one. I read this book. An academic neurosurgeon for over 20 years at Boston's Brigham and Women's Hospital, at Boston's Children's Hospital, and at Harvard Medical School. He fell into himself a deep coma due to bacterial meningitis. It was from a particularly vicious strain of E. coli. By his own account in a book that he wrote, Proof of Heaven, I would have said Indications of Heaven, but he wrote Proof of Heaven. Clinically, he was brain dead, incapable of thought or even hallucinations. But he reported visiting an afterlife, meeting spiritual guides and a woman who was a sister he had never known. And of course, When he recovered, came through, he learned that he had had this sister who had died before he was born. And of course, many, probably the majority of medical critics, debunk this kind of interpretation. His teachings are consistent with people who have experienced near death as real. I'm going to do one more, and then we'll stop for some questions and political people say rebuttal. Joel Witten, MD and PhD, is a professor of emeritus of Toronto, York, and Guelph universities in Canada, and a staff psychiatrist at the Toronto Hospital. His specialties were migraine, chronic pain, head injuries, and trauma. Through his research into past lives and reincarnation, he used hypnosis to take patients back into their former lives to uncover the origins of traumas and neuroses that afflicted them. He succeeded in healing people by sorting out their past karma. Karma meaning the destiny and challenges and cards we have all been dealt with in life, good and bad. He saw and believed that the actions, attitudes, successes, and failures in one life could determine the setting, challenges, and destiny of a life or lives to come. Through painstaking hypnotic sleuthing, Dr. Witten compiled personal inventories of past lives, and this is hard to believe, it seems, stretching in some cases across hundreds of years, numerous personalities, but with continuity of consciousness from birth to death, through transition, and then rebirth. And he also documented the events between death and the next birth. Have these conversations. What happens when we die? Are we judged? Do we come back? And in the traditional literature and in the traditional classic orthodoxy of Machayat HaMeitim, resurrection of the body, these very issues are raised and debated and discussed. What happens after death? It's an area rarely studied. So Witten carefully studied subjects and documented in great detail, recalled past lives and the events between those lives, as well as causes and effects through many lifetimes he was witnessing. The shortest interval he observed between lives was 10 months, the longest exceeding 800 years. Nearly done. Metaconsciousness is his term for spiritual insights gained during life between life. Metaconsciousness suggests that consciousness, our consciousness, is continuous. That part of us,
Yeah, where would that be?
the higher spirit, is indeed immortal, like Judaism's immortal soul. According to Simcha Raphael, it's one of the books, and I should say, I wrote bibliography. It should have said selected bibliography, and he's written one of the classics. He wrote, Nachmanides' writings reflect an emerging psychological orientation. Increasingly, the experience of life after death comes to be seen as a state of consciousness, unquote. That's Nachmanides. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the soul's in-between time is called the bardo, kind of like Olam Haba in our tradition. According to Dr. Witten, consciousness is transferable from our time of life between birth and death and our higher spirit, as it is suggested in Kabbalah and some rabbinic teachings about levels of the soul. Rabbi Adras and Goodman, and maybe several others of you know about Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. We've talked about that in the past. I'm going to stop now because I'm sure we've got some questions, comments, reactions. Let's try to stay right on this topic.
If anybody has a question, please raise their hand, the blue hand. I don't see any, Rabbi.
Does any of this make sense? Is this a way out? We had a session on Jewish views of life after death. How does this compare, for example, with resurrection of the body, which is Machayat HaMeitim, from which classic orthodoxy takes place. That makes sense? Does the fact that we die mean that everything's gone? What about conservation of life and soul? Are these questions you ask? Does this make sense from experts like this? I'd be interested in your reactions. Marcia?
Well, I don't believe in any of this, but this goes back to mysticism.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, you know, anybody can say whatever they want to say. Anybody could say, I'm in my second life. Anybody can say this is how it was when I was alive at another time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of how you speak and how you impress your thinking and or beliefs on other people. And frankly, death is for the living. Living people are the people who experience the death of somebody else. We grieve, we mourn, we have heartache, we remember good times, we remember bad times, and dead people do not, I mean, they have seances, they believe. I can't see any real validity to any of this thinking.
You read any of these books? Have you, I mean, these are not talk show hosts.
I just don't even care to, because it's not a topic that I have any faithful thinking about.
Okay, next.
Ruth Van Alstine. Ruth, unmute yourself, please.
Yes. Thank you for being here, Rabbi.
Thank you.
It's an interesting conversation, and I've always believed in, not always, but for a very long time believed in reincarnation. And it's interesting. When I converted, I actually went through, the rabbi who I went through was Orthodox rabbi. Actually, I went through that process with him, and we had long conversations. He actually believed in reincarnation, and he told me that I had been Jewish before, and that kind of the whole process was beside the point, because he said I'd been Jewish. And so it was very interesting. And I'd always believed that I had many lives. And so, yes, and I've done a lot of reading with these people. Maybe not all of these people you've talked about, but yes. I believe that we come back to learn things, certain things, and we work on our issues, and we learn, and hopefully we work through things. And then if we don't, we have a chance to come back and work on things again. And we do the best we can.
Good. Well, that is, in fact, one of the traditional Jewish views, especially in Hasidism. So thank you.
Yes.
Who's next? Lance?
Lance Sugarman.
Yeah, you mentioned that people had counterpointed. I had heard of some of these authors before, and so not delved into it myself, but what is the peer review of these? Have these people have put out books? Have they put out published articles in peer review magazines? And what have the peer reviews come back with, and so on?
At the risk of making people uncomfortable today, the best analogy I can think of would be, kind of like Georgia and Florida football, or Red Sox and Yankees. I mean, it's many have suggested, just as our first speaker said, I just don't believe this. It's just not possible. And yet others have, and we're going to be looking at some of the specifics of that. But yeah, there have been. Some of these cohere with others. Part of the problem is, and I think the word is evidence and proof. We are of the scientific mind state. And if we can't prove it empirically, repetition, controlled studies, it doesn't exist. And yet we've talked this way theologically about God or about love. How can we prove that love exists? What do you mean by that? How do you know? Is it emotion? Is it chemicals? We know. If you're in love, you know what that feels like. So I guess the answer is there have been some that have reinforced each other and a small group, and others who have said, I don't know how this can possibly be. We're going to look at some of the specifics in a few minutes. Who's
David-
next?
David Sellen has his hand up. David, please unmute.
I used to teach the Life After Life book in my psychology classes as a basic common book during the chapters on death and dying and situations. And the students liked it because it was everyday people that he talked about. And he gave a thorough discussion of what each one came up with. And he also said that there were 5 things, and I'm not going to go through it. There are 5 things that each one of the cases that he mentions all repeated in their what they said. Now, of course, you can believe it, and today, no, there were no peer reviews, but I like to bring to the class things that maybe they could think about, maybe not. You know, he also wrote a book about children after he wrote that book. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to be getting into some of those specifics soon. Let me just put this out. In my session a couple of weeks ago, one of the good pieces of information is that in Judaism, your belief of an afterlife, life after death, there's no afterlife, no survival, reincarnation, it's optional. It is not a fundamental as it is in, say, the Christian, Buddhist, Hindu ways, where it's an absolutely key philosophical plank. In Judaism, you can have many different views, and they're all authentic because, after all, we can't prove it one way or another. It's not about proof. It's about what makes sense and what are other authentic views that I myself may not subscribe to, but don't have to denigrate as a Baba Misa or, again, Machayat HaMeitim, resurrection of the body, which is why in traditional Orthodoxy and in classical traditional Judaism, suicides weren't buried in the cemetery or outside the fence. Why there was no cremation. It's why there were a number of customs, because you're going to need your body. So in my way of thinking is, gee, if that's true, I sure hope I come back with the 60-year-old sharp mind, but the 20-year-old physical body. I'm not sure how that works out. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, as every one of you will probably, I hope, agree, and certainly every rabbi understands, it's what we do in this world. It's about mitzvot, and it's about living right. It's about doing it. And then what will be, will be. So what's not at stake is integrity or theology or salvation. The technical word is soteriology, meaning the whole study of what happens to us and how we are move on. So, but it is interesting conversation. We have some more hands.
Jody Setlin is next. Jody, please unmute.
Hi. I appreciate this topic. I belong to a small group of friends who gather weekly to study and meditate together and practice Jewish meditation on a regular basis. And we have lots of wonderful discussions. And the book that we're in the midst of right now is a very light read, but it's very enlightening, called Einstein and the Rabbi by Naomi Levy. we've studied Musar in the past. So what I printed out from a friend who's in this group was a kind of a summary by Rabbi David Cooper of the Kabbalistic view of the different levels of the soul, and getting familiar with them. And I obviously won't go into them now, but a lot of this makes so much sense to me. And I really appreciate what you said, Rabbi Raskin, concerning it's a matter of my choice, what I want to believe. And I love that about Judaism as well, because I have sort of in development stages about my beliefs about the soul and about, but I know that I have experienced many moments in my life that where I have felt elevated, not talking about looking down on anybody, but lighter, more connected, totally plugged in, connection, a really strong connection with a force of some kind or a spiritual feeling. And a lot of that I get from my temple family and coming to services and my practicing my faith. But a lot of it is based on this idea that we carry a soul, that the soul I've got now, that I thank God every morning for returning to me, came from somewhere else and is on a long continuous journey. And when I'm in trouble or in pain or experiencing long agonizing difficulty, and many of us have, most of us, that's life, I deal with it by saying, well, there's something I'm supposed to be learning here that I'm obviously not learning. Otherwise, why would this experience resurface so many times? Why would this pattern be so present in my life? And I also like to think that perhaps the soul that I carry didn't do such a good job of dealing with this the last time around, and that's why I'm having to deal with this now. And that perhaps if I manifest in the best way possible, my soul will continue on to enjoy more enlightenment.
Well, I want to thank you, because that is one of the classical positions of a Jewish reincarnation, Gilgul HaNefesh. And it's also one of the common themes in most of the people who've written about this from a philosophical or even a medical view. The good news is there's some coherence. So maybe not clinical peer reviews, but each one is saying very similar things. We're there to, I think one of the words Whitten uses is, afterlife is like cosmic schooling. We're here to improve, we'll learn to, and that lines up, it parallels some of the language in our liturgy about moving on in Olam Haba. So I thank you. Let me take one more, continue, and then we'll get some more questions.
Marcus Hale is the next one up.
Sure. Thank you, Gene. Can you hear me okay? I wanted to say that I think this sounds a lot like, it makes sense, particularly coming from the idea of a living God. And Rabbi Address, you referenced Abraham Heschel this morning, and I was thinking of his book, Man is Not Alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a quote pulled up here that says, all that is left is a choice to answer or to refuse to answer. Yet the more deeply we listen, the more we become stripped of the arrogance and callousness which alone would enable us to refuse. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you. I was honored to have studied with Rabbi Heschel in New York at Columbia. So I had a lot of contact with him, and now people have really seen his role, and it adds the whole concept of wonder, awe, being just amazed at the beautiful flowers. I've been in Florida now 11 years, and every winter I look out and I see flowers and I'm amazed. But if you're from New England, that's a typical kind of reaction. Thank you.
Right.
One more, and then we'll go on to the next.
Next one is up is Ron and/or Barbara Hood. Please unmute.
Thank you, Rabbi, for such an interesting topic. I really appreciate it. I have actually done some reading in that area. It first started off with my father passed away, and he had a near-death experience. And I personally knew my father very well, probably was closer to him than the other family members. And I knew that it was real for him, but I won't, that's a personal thing.
Mhm.
But anyway, I have watched the videos of children who are under school age, and there are 2,000 of these studies done by the University of Virginia. And if you ever watched them, these children knew things they could not possibly have known. They told information about their former life, and they went back and validated those, what they said. Anyway, it convinced me. I think it's a wonderful topic, and thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you. I'm going to be getting to that, touching on it very briefly in a couple of minutes. Let me go ahead and continue. So what are some of these phenomena? And I think this is part of the handout that I prepared. Phenomena reported by most from all of these, whether it's been in literature or in rabbinic or theological writings, whether it's a psychiatrist, MDs, near-death experience, and there is a continuum. You mentioned spiritual phenomena. You know, some people are more open to mystical experiences. Some people have a capacity for this. They've done studies, the fellow who's done studies in IQ. And we think of IQ as math and verbal and performance. And now they've done social intelligence and emotional intelligence. And they've shown that some people are more gifted in those areas and with some development. And one of the areas they've been working on, but I haven't read anything lately, is spiritual intelligence. Some people are more gifted and more receptive to paranormal events. So that having been said, let me thank you, and let's move on. So let's look at this list here. These are phenomena reported by most who have had these experiences of past life regression, or near-death experience, or after-death experience, which is contact by deceased loved ones. And I have to agree with what you just said. The fact is, when you read case after case after case after case after case, people from all walks of life, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands, you still may not believe it, but you have to at least suggest that, well, maybe there's something there for some people. So number one, and so I think this is all very positive. What I'm not getting, and in all the reading that I've done, is, well, you know, you go up there and it's very confusing, and you know, it's conflicted, and you have a lot of paperwork to do, and there's never enough time. I don't hear that. I hear all this very positive stuff. Euphoric feelings of joy, love, serenity, and inner harmony. No fear, no pain. Over and over, people report, I'm okay, I'm well, I'm not in pain, I feel well, don't worry about me, take care of your life. 2, experiencing a tunnel-like movement to increasingly varied light, colored light or a very bright light. Those two things, joy and a feeling of serenity, and a tunnel-like vision ending in a bright light. They seem to be, if not 100% across the board, very common with most people who've reported these experiences, regardless of their age or situation. 3, connecting with loved ones, known or unfamiliar. Well, that's one of the great wishes of anyone who contemplates passing on into a future. There, we would get to see some of the people we've known or some of the people we haven't known. greeted by a supportive guide. Okay. Sometimes it's a relative, a friend, sometimes it's someone unknown. This is interesting. Life review. And we talk so much about judgment and the book of having lived well and the balance of the scales in our own theology and in our own liturgy. And there they reported either being judged by a panel of 3 or 7, but not in a harsh, condemnatory way, but in order to instruct, to improve a soul's next step. And the next step is either to reincarnate in a new life, or if it's a near-death experience, again, over and over again, we've seen this in Moody and Whitten's work, the return. It's not time for you to be here. You need to go back. And often the person is reluctant because they have this great sense of serenity. And the studies have followed these people who have, quote, returned from a near-death experience. They've all lived very differently, very calmly, very serenely, very hopeful, just much more transformed because it's a transforming experience. Second, there's a sense of judgment, either self-judgment or God. Whitten says the afterlife, I think I mentioned this, is like a cosmic classroom. And you know, that's very appealing in Judaism. And it's appealing to a lot of us. The whole purpose of life is to move on and to improve and to grow and to flourish. There's a Hebrew concept, pardes, heavenly orchard, similar to the Garden of Eden, Gan of Eden. We discussed that a couple of weeks ago. But the goal in either case, whether you believe in reincarnation or in the traditional Jewish philosophy, is to promote personal growth and integrity. So all of the questionings, well, what about horrible people and sinful people and good? Well, we know most of us are not completely saints, and most of us are not terrible, awful, sadistic sinners. Most are in the middle. So it's how do we come to terms with our weaknesses and how do we come to terms with our areas for growth? A seventh is spiritual rebalancing. You know, one of the symbols of this time of the year with Rosh Hashanah are the scales. And we read in some of the liturgy this morning, got some good stuff, the Yetzer Hara, the good impulses, the Yetzer HaTov, the bad, and the Al Chet. We mentioned all of the things that we could have done better. And there was even at the very end, HaTov, the things that we have done well, because we need to take credit for that too. Because very few of us are all saints or all sinners. So in a sense, this spiritual rebalancing is kind of an afterlife do-over. Something to think about. I have a couple more, but I wanted to stop. We have a hand. Ann, are you still on?
Ann Stone has her hand up. Ann, if you unmute yourself, please.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gene.
Going back to, I believe in it. I don't know anybody really that has encountered this, except that I had lost an uncle, and shortly after he passed away, like 2 years, his son had a son out of he never thought he would have any more children, and all of a sudden he had his wife became pregnant and he had this son, and the son knew things that nobody could know at his age. He just knew things, not so much about a past life or that he lived before, but just knowledge that he knew. And so I think there's certain people that are blessed this way, if it's a blessing, you know, and it can happen. We're not all chosen, but I think some are chosen.
Right, and it can be a gift and a blessing, and it can also be a source of great conflict and confusion. I'm going to be giving my concluding reading on that very, very topic.
Rabbi Jim Grant has his hand up.
Thank you.
Well, I just add a comment. First of all, of course, I have not had any of what we are discussing about, but all of my life I worked and technology. And much of it was at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where our atomic bombs were built. I took care of the computers there, as well as a number of other things. And it was interesting. I was in various meetings in which there were these people who actually repeated much of what you have just said, but especially the most common things to nearly every one of them was that they had some kind of usually terrible accident and were killed in this accident, but for whatever reason came back to life. Well, anyway, they went through much of the things you mentioned there, the bright light and the tunnel trip with a lot of wind frequently. And sometimes the travel was for quite some time. And then they did actually, in some cases, say they met angels. They always had someone they met, and a number of the things that you mentioned. But all of these people were very well educated. All of them were men, because in the business we were in, that was mostly men in those years, the 1950s and 60s and so on. So anyway, I just wanted to pass that comment on, that, in support of what you're saying.
Thank you, Jim. Well, Anthony has a comment, and then I'll move on to the last item.
Anthony, there you go.
Shalom. Hello.
Shalom. Shalom.
I just wanted to make a contribution about reincarnation. A couple of cultures that I know of in Nigeria specifically have got ideas of reincarnation. One of them is the Yoruba ethnic group, which is widespread over West Africa, and we have descendants of the Yorubas in the Caribbean and as far as Brazil and even other parts where you have the dispersion of Africans after the transatlantic trade of slaves, people that were enslaved. But there are names in those cultures that actually imply reincarnation, because like you have a name among the Yoruba that's Babatunde, which literally means father has come back. There's a female equivalent, Yetunde, which means mom has come back. In my own culture, which is the Anang of Eastern Nigeria, close to the Igbos, that territory where the Igbos are, there's a name, Etete, which actually means grandfather. And then the female version is Ekaite, which actually means grandmom. Occasion is as if the parent is thinking that this child is a reincarnation of his or her dad or mom. And that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you for adding. Of course, it reminds us Ashkenazic Jews of the tradition of naming a newborn child after a deceased or recently deceased grandparent to carry on the memory. But again, in classical Hasidic thought, the soul actually is supposed to be the similar soul. Okay, so we'll get into some specifics, and I have a bunch of very specific things, and if you want to get into detail next Tuesday. So Dr. Ian Stevenson wrote on xenoglossy. Xenoglossy is speech in a language totally unknown to the speaker. And xenography is writing that person has never, not even had French 102 or a couple of weeks of Hebrew. So Dr. Witten hypnotized a 37-year-old behavioral scientist. Two things. He spoke 22 words related to Icelandic Norwegian in Old Norse. Old Norse, like Old French and Old English, but it's much older. Of course, he'd never been to Iceland or knew Norwegian or anything. And then he started scribbling what looked like Arabic writings They didn't know what it was. Witten located an expert at the Library of Congress, who was an expert in the Near Eastern department. He identified those scribbles as an extinct Mesopotamian language. It was a language that was in use from 226 to 651, just about 400 years of the Common Era. This language is, well, so how do you explain that? Now, we've got people who have some real skills in language. I'm familiar with a lot of the ancient languages, not personally and fluently, but we know about Aramaic. I've heard of Akkadian and Sumerian. Jim, you might be the only candidate, but or maybe one of my two colleagues. Has anybody ever heard of Sassanid Pahlavi? I had never heard of it. So how do you explain that? And the answer is there's no way to explain it, and it's what it is. So it's things like that that just kind of make us have to look at things as an outlier. Okay, summary points. And we may finish a tiny bit early if possible. 5 points. Judaism has many authentic views of life after death. The key for us all is to live well and act well while on earth, just like the lessons that we're supposed to do, regardless of what our view is, in reincarnation or afterlife or no afterlife. 2, Jewish views of rebirth, karma, and afterlife, they're different. They're not the same as those of Eastern faiths. We could talk about that if you have an interest in that. I studied a little Eastern and comparative religion in college. They're similar, but not the same. They're parallels, but they function differently. Again, we can only affirm a view, whatever it is. The purpose, the goal of each is divine justice. We're all looking for justification, why people have suffered, and how is that compensated? Or people have made mistakes, and they recoup from that. And also growth of the soul, regardless of your view. Number 4, very few souls are beyond help. Most are okay, and they have to work that out. And these are Jewish views, of course. And then 5th, I'd leave you with, before I conclude, with some Jewish terms that are useful to know if you're going to have this conversation in any depth. Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, translated erroneously as heaven, but it's the Jewish view of paradise. Gehenna, we talked about this before. Purgatory experience, learning school. Olam haba, the world to come. We always talk in Judaism about Olam hazeh and Olam haba, this world and the world to come. As we like to say in Yiddish, Genevel, the next world. And yet the word Olam, thinking about it, isn't just a place, a space. Olam means world. Melech ha'olam, God, you are the sovereign of the universe. Olam also means time, eternal, forever, as in le'olam va'ed, blessed forever and ever. So looking at Olam haba as time rather than a location on a map, it's food for thought. Sheol, Hades, Sheol, kind of the shadowy place from biblical time. Hayat HaMetim, resurrection of the body. And Gilgul HaNefesh, recycling of souls, a little bit different than classic reincarnation. The point of all of this, regardless of what you believe, be good. If I have a couple of questions, and then I have a concluding reading. You've got a couple of minutes.
You have Rabbi
Goodman wants to say something.
Rabbi Goodman.
Yeah, thank you. I unmuted. Rabbi Raskin, thank you for a fascinating presentation. When I was young, I think I was pretty dumb. Anything that didn't jump out at me as being true. You know, I sort of listened politely because I've interacted with an awful lot of people in 50 years. And, you know, all right, that's interesting. And I blew it off. And the older I get, the more I realize I don't know. And I have heard so many stories from people, anecdotes of, and now I say, I don't know. It's possible. It's interesting. And I think we all have to be open to what we don't know. And I think this, you give us a great deal of food for thought. And so for me, there isn't even a jury yet. It's just my mind's open to possibilities. I've always loved science fiction, and things are presented which I wouldn't normally think about. And I think you give us a great deal of food for thought. And I'm saying, I'm eager to learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Appreciate it. All right. I'm going to conclude with something here. Just to, I'll tell you, Witten's book is out of publication. This book is not. And we talked about children. So a 2-year-old California baseball prodigy, his name was Christian Houck. He was a prodigy. He was 2, and he could throw a ball like a 6 or 7-year-old. He began sharing vivid memories of being a baseball player in the 1920s and 30s. And this is in California. I mean, they're not going to be following East Coast baseball. From riding cross country on trains to his fierce rivalry with Babe Ruth, he declared historical facts about the life of American baseball legend Lou Gehrig that he could not have possibly known at the time, 2 years old. Distraught by her son's uncanny revelations, his mother, Kathy, started a journey of discovery that would shake her she was a fundamentalist Christian, shake her views to the core and forever change her views on life and death. She went to her minister and he said, it's the devil and this is horrible. She found another minister eventually and he explained, and as Bob did, to be open to experiences. But she wrote a book and it's called The Boy Who Knew Too Much, an astounding true story of a young boy's past life memories. 2017, somewhat recent. Kathy Bird shares her experiences, lessons she learned, and a story of healing in the lives of these intertwined souls. And by the way, a movie was being made by the same name. I don't know whether it had to be slowed down because of COVID, but making a movie of this. And there are many other titles of children recalling past life histories in astonishingly accurate detail. And they're also a fascinating story. Does anybody remember, maybe some of us in the older group, Bridie Murphy? Does that name ring a bell? Anybody remember that? Bridie Murphy was, back in the 50s, was a housewife in the West, Idaho, I don't remember. And she claimed that she was born in Ireland and had this family, and caused quite a stir then. And they checked it out and they went to the little town and she had described the story. You know, I think Rabbi Goodman said it well. We don't know. We don't have to know. Rabbi Goodman has to teach, and Rabbi Adress has to do a service, and Rabbi Raskin has to do what he has to do. And we all have our jobs. This is just another way of looking at the meaning of life. So, yes. Any final comment? Well, if not, I will.
Anthony has something to say.
Anthony has something. He's got a couple of minutes before we tune up.
Oh,
I just wanted to include, I mentioned that a cousin of mine actually had the name in my culture course, which is actually a shortened form of the name for old person. So, and this was someone that was one of my youngest cousins. So for the parents to actually give him a name, it was an old person, and it was actually acted like an old soul. Life, as if knowing stuff he shouldn't be knowing, and having a kind of wisdom beyond his age. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.
Rabbi,
yeah.
2 minutes left.
All right. Well, I'm concluded. Again, a week from Tuesday, 10:30, we'll continue this. I'm going to go into another direction. We have talked about what Jewish thinkers and rabbis and scholars have said. We discussed some of the clinicians' approach, and the next time I'm going to be taking a secular group, and that you're going to find interesting as well. So, anyway, I thank you for your attention and time and interest, and I wish you all a very nice and a healthy, happy, prosperous, and serene new year. And thank you, Gene, for your help.
Thank you for a great presentation. Happy New Year to you both. And we now have about 7 minutes until Rabbi Address comes on. So please unmute if you'd like to, and I'll let you know when we start the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Bob. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Rabbi Raskin?
Yes.
Well, when I was reading your bibliography, my eyes fixed on that Sasanic
Pahlavi.
Yeah, that language that you mentioned that's been disappeared since the 600s, right? Something like that.
That's what I read.
Well, this has nothing to do with anything, I'm sure, but I was watching a series on one of the Prime or Netflix or something called Outlander, and it had time travel in it.
Yeah,
And right, and so I don't know if you remember the nickname or the affectionate name that the male protagonist called Claire. Sassenach, that's right. That's what I thought of when I saw that word, and I wondered if there was any connection.
I believe that's Scottish for
An English woman or
well, for a foreigner.
A foreigner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it sounds the same, but it's not the same linguistic root.
Okay.
All right. It's a good association. Wonderful. Shana Tova, everyone. Thank you.
Shana Tova.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Enjoyed it. Thank you. Hey, folks. Shana Tova.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shana Tova.
Oh, Felice, how are you?
I'm fabulous. Thank you. I missed your last presentation. Is there any way that it was recorded or anything?
Yes, it was.
Yes, Felice, all of these are being recorded. They will be available on our website. Give us about a few days to get it up.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to Judy, tell her hi. So that's
She's here, walking around. Yeah, I'm not so sure that when this COVID is over, how happy I'm going to be. She made challah and brisket. I'm telling you, I'm very surprised and delighted. Nice to see you, Felice.
I want to recommend a movie, if you can hear me.
Yes.
It was a movie I saw in 1980 with Ellen Burstyn called Resurrection.
Oh, wow.
And it still haunts me today, 40 years later. And it deals with, she goes beyond and comes back, and how transformative it is. And it's a very powerful, poignant movie, and the issues she faced afterward. I just looked it up quickly on Amazon. I know they sell it. There may be a way that a person could rent it and see it. But it was a very haunting movie.
I'll try to catch it this week, Bob. Thank you. There are other movies too. And that's a more general conversation about the whole paranormal experiences, nothing to do necessarily with death. So that's a different, slice.
If I remember correctly, it gave her some special healing powers to help other people. She came back and ended up living in some place in Western California in the desert. But
don't tell us too much. You won't want to see the movie.
that's all I remember. But I just remember I found it very
Thank
haunting.
you. Be well.
Very
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Okay, we'll see you at Kisker, folks.
I got to tell you, Rabbi Address, that after this experience this year, I think we're going to have a hard time. I know that if we're all together next year in in a sanctuary, I'm going to have so many people come to me and say, we could do this in under 2 hours. Why does it take 4 to do it live?
Timing is, yeah, we had Carrie and I had a long conversation about it, how much to adapt the services. Most of my colleagues who are doing this, you know, virtually or whatever, have amended the timing of the service. So most of us have agreed that the necessity of having a 3-hour service and asking people to sit in front of a screen for 3 hours is probably ludicrous. Since I have found, since I started doing a lot of teaching in April, that what I call the Tushy quotient, that's a technical, it gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
I used to be able to sit for I'd had a couple of meetings when this first started, like 3-hour sessions. Nobody does, well, that's not true, but it's tougher to, after about an hour and hour and a half, you sort of like, you know, it's the challenge of modern technology. Somebody will come up with an invention somewhere, somehow in the next 6 months.
I was just thinking I needed a different kind of chair to sit in. That's the whole answer to the problem.
That's why I stand. That's no problem for rabbis and cantors because we stand all the time. And here's a secret that a lot of times you can't see. Like behind these big pulpits, we sometimes do like exercise with our legs just to make sure we can still feel our legs by the end of the day. And it's usually about 4:15, 4:30 that my ankles start to say, that's enough. That's enough. You know, not as my doctor is wont of saying, you know, you're not as young as you used to be.
Oh, you're a baby.
No, no, I ain't no baby. So listen, it's with your permission, because I'm going to run into a little bit of a time crunch because we're going to do services at 4, and it's not a question we can delay it to like 4:15 because with the everything lined up and the technical people are moving in now, and I'm waiting for the cancer to come back. So what I want to, if it's okay with you guys, if there's a major objection, I just want to just go over some. We're not going to do an hour because I have to be in the sanctuary in about 20 minutes to just warm up and make sure that some of the things we've set up are ready to go. And we did some of that. We moved some furniture around after the morning service.
Rabbi, excuse me for one moment. Will everybody please mute their microphones?
Oh.
Please mute your microphones, except for the rabbi.
Oh, thought I got away with it then. But anyway,
we should be good now.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Gene. And again, thank you, Gene, for quarterbacking this, because as I'm from the generation who knows not technology. And also, thank you very much. There's a bunch of very nice things in the chat room about services this morning, so I really do appreciate that, and the cantor does as well. If you have a high holiday book, if you open up to page 338, it's going to make things a lot easier. If you don't have a high holiday book, don't worry about it. I'll just refer it. The Torah portion for Yom Kippur afternoon is, again, one of the great Torah portions. It comes up in the spring because it's Leviticus. Leviticus 19. And the reason why I wanted to just mention it, because we're not doing a formal afternoon service and an afternoon Torah service. It's part of we changed it for the teaching as opposed to more liturgy. So this is, I always describe this passage, ladies and gentlemen, as the Reader's Digest, if you remember Reader's Digest. The Reader's Digest version of Jewish ethics. And it works like this. Some of you may remember one of the probably in the top 5 worst inventions of the human race. Worst, like why? And that's called the cocktail party. Now, this is a place of dread for most colleagues because we would have to go to one of these things and we would have our glass of seltzer because God forbid you should drink with all your congregants around. And somebody would walk up to you and as you're looking at your watch saying, how quickly can I get out of here? And somebody would say, oh, Rabbi, do you mind if I just ask you a question? Just have 30 seconds. That's code language for, you're going to be here for about 4 hours, because this is one of those questions that you can't answer in 30 questions. And they'll ask something about, why does Judaism believe in? Okay. If that ever happens to you, and my throat's starting to go, if that ever happens to you, just tell them to go home and read Leviticus 19, because everything, it's all encapsulated. This is a great chapter. All the basic moral, ritual, ethical, social justice, ethics that are found in thousands of years of Jewish history are found in this one chapter. And it's each paragraph is separated by the concept of Ani Adonai. I am the Lord. In other words, why do you do these certain things? Because you are in a sacred relationship with a power that is beyond yourself. Okay. So for example, you have the ritual laws right away about Shabbat. That's the first thing that it talks about. It's about Shabbat. And then you have that superscription, Ani Adonai Elohechem, which appears over and over. I am the Lord your God. Okay. Now go to verse 10. Here you have an economic, social welfare, ethical passage about when you reap the harvest of your field, and this appears other passages. What are you supposed to do? You're not supposed to touch the corners. Why? You should leave them because there are always going to be people who don't have enough to eat. What does this have to do with now? It means right now, tomorrow, you write a check to the local food bank in Jacksonville, because there are people in Jacksonville who do not have enough food to eat because of the pandemic. Okay, that's exactly what this is. And notice that it understands there are always going to be people in need, always. Okay, verse 15 says, "You shall not do injustice in judgment. You shall not favor one who is weak. You shall not defer to one who is powerful. You shall judge your kin with justice. You shall not spread slander amongst your people, and you shall not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Why? I am God." This is a whole semester. This is power. Look at the verse 15, 16. This is power. You're supposed to be judged equitably. You know, the scales of justice are blind. You shall not defer to people in power. You could write books about, just take today's headlines, especially today's headlines, or yesterday's headlines, or any headlines in the last God knows how many years, and juxtapose it to this moral and ethical stance of what Judaism says. It has to do with power. It has to do with money. It has to do with control. It has to do with all kinds of things that pervert justice. And then for those of you who are medically inclined, here you have one of the great proof texts in Jewish tradition. We have not had a chance to talk about, and hopefully we will, oh my God, about the impact of Judaism in medicine and the linkage between Judaism and medicine. But here is one of the classic proof texts which allowed people to grow up to be doctors. And that is, you shall not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. In other words, if you see somebody in pain, you must help them. If you see somebody sick, you must help them. There's another passage from Deuteronomy that will eventually I'll try and teach you. This is one of the 2 or 3 major bioethics proof texts in all of Judaism. That lays the foundation for the entire development of Judaism and medicine. And here's another one that's absolutely, that you may not have known, that came from Leviticus 19. Va'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The golden rule, whatever. This is where it comes from. It comes from this particular passage in the book of Leviticus. That, again, encapsulates the thing is you love your neighbor as yourself. Psychologically, for those of the mental health field on this call, what does it mean to love yourself? What does it mean to love yourself? And there is enough, and again, all you have to do is look at the news. There's enough people who act out against other people, who criticize other people, who attack the other, that psychologically, based on this passage, you'd hold up a mirror and say they really don't like themselves. They don't even respect themselves, and they project that onto other people. It's a fascinating passage. Verse 32, one we use all the time in my Jewish sacred aging work. Rise up before the one whose head is white with age. Regard an elder with respect. This is the zichronim, the elders. This is part of who we are in our culture. And there's another sermon in this, which we don't have time to do now. And that's enough already today. So this is the classic, one of the 2 or 3 classic passages on respect for elders that come from the Torah. And verse 35, this is the delicatessen passage. You shall not act unjustly in judgment, in the measurement of weight and in liquid measure, and you shall have honest scales, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. In other words, I know this doesn't happen in Jacksonville, but the deli that I go to, when you go and you get a pound of corned beef, and the guy slices it and he says, it's a little over. That's contrary to this passage. If you order a pound of corned beef, you're entitled to a pound of corned beef, not a pound and an eighth of corned beef or less. We always have fun with this passage, but really, again, it goes to the moral, ethical aspect of Judaism as a moral and ethical religious civilization. Again, in summary, all underlined by this continuous line of Ani Adonai. You do this because you are in a sacred relationship with a power beyond oneself. Again, I just wanted to point this out to you. You can read this. It's a great passage. I don't know whether there are any questions. If you do, or anything else, I got about 2 minutes before I have to run and warm up to see if I have a fastball for the next couple of hours, or whether we're just going to rely on our off-speed stuff to get to the shofar. And by the way, for Neila, I mentioned this, I'll mention this too in the Bima on TV. If you have a shofar at home, it's going to be really cool. Maybe we can blast out the city of Jacksonville. That would be really cosmic. But we have, the service ends with Tekiah Gedolah. If you have a shofar at home, take it out, warm it up, and when we get to that passage, when we hear the call for Tekiah Gedolah, let it loose. Just let it loose. And if your neighbor complains, just say, listen, be careful what you ask for or you're concerned about, because if I do that again, the walls of your house may come down.
Okay, Rabbi Felice has a question. She has her hand up.
Okay, Felice, you have the honor.
Thank you so much. This has been so spectacular, this whole holiday. Thank you so much to everybody.
We're not done yet, Felice. We still got, I have like 3 hours before I head to Sacred Dunkin' Donuts.
I can't stop laughing and being joyful with all this. I having grown up in the delicatessen business, I had a question about the weight. And that is, my thought about that always was, and I could talk to you another time if you want, because I know you have to run, is that if he says it's a pound, but it's really an ounce or 2 less than a pound, that's what's not honorable. But if he says it's a little over, is that okay? Then if assuming you say yes, then it's not a problem. That was my
if you agree that you want an extra, or some guys, they just say it's a little over. And I know people say, well, just let me sample it. I'm going to make sure it tastes good. So they'll take I'm not joking, by the way. I'm not joking at all. It's a good way to get snacks at the deli, It's a little like, let me taste it. Let me see if it's okay. Not like you're going to give it away. Put it back, re-slice it, put it back in the case. So you're from the deli business?
Yes, many years. I started working when I was 12 years old in my daddy's restaurant.
In New York?
Yes. Bless you, New York.
Oh,
That,
I don't want to mess with New York Deli because I'm from Philly and we always get jumped on. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you for your very kindness. I'm going to run and I will see you on TV, which is a bizarre way of saying I'll see you at Yisker. Don't forget the Kleenex. Take care. Shabbat. Good Yontiv.
and if this was awesome.
Everybody, there is approximately 18 minutes until the service starts, 15, 18. If you'd like to stay on, I'll be happy to keep the Zoom up.
Love
And you have
to.
the opportunity to unmute and talk.
Thank you, Gene.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Hey, I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Gene, this experience, this whole
Bye.
holy experience is so spectacular. Thank you.
It is
Yes,
equally.
thank you, Jean.
You're
It's
very
been
welcome.
lovely. It's
Yes.
been just wonderful. More than lovely.
Yes, yes.
Magnificent.
Looking
Yes.
forward to more.
Magnificent.
I'm trying to type a message and can't seem to do it. So I'll tell you, it's been wonderful and I'm looking forward to more.
Right. Marilyn, I didn't get a chance to see you before this. I'm happy to see you.
Me too. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Felice.
Ruth, where are you
Haven't
right now?
seen.
Are you in New York or Jacksonville?
I am in Northampton, Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. Oh, okay.
I am at my sister Caroline's
Your
house
sister?
right now. Next weekend, I'll be in Oneonta, New York at
Oh,
my
wow.
other sister's house.
Oh, that's really
We're
nice.
going to help take care of my recuperating sister for the caregiver sister so she can get a break. So, yeah.
Good.
Yep.
Okay,
And
well,
then
it's
I'll
good to
be
see you.
home. I'll be home on the 12th of October.
Okay, 1 minute. I have a call. All right, I have to get on.
So, yes, I am still up north.
How many sisters are there, Ruthie?
I have 3 sisters and 2 brothers
Very nice.
that all live up north. Yep. So it's been scary, but I've had 2 COVID tests so far that were negative. So I actually flew up here in a one of those medical PPE outfits with mask and shield and gloves.
Wow.
On the airplane, and I'm going to wear the same thing on the way down. I don't care.
Good for you.
I don't care what they say.
Yes.
And I'm going to quarantine for 2 weeks and then maybe get another COVID test.
They're free at the Mandarin Senior Center. That's where I've been going.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they have very few people there, so it's nothing to worry about. You line up outside and they only let a couple of people in at a time, and they took over the whole seniors, it's all spread out.
Oh, okay.
It looks pretty safe.
Well,
I just took my 3rd test there today.
Okay. Well, so far my insurance paid for the first one. We'll see if they paid for the second one. My insurance company said they would pay for it no matter where I went. I don't know. They paid for the first one. We'll see if they pay for the second one.
Yeah, well, the senior center is free and the city's paying for it as far as I know.
Oh,
They don't
okay.
ask you anything other than you have to show a driver's license that you're a resident of Duval County.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
You only show
okay.
that once. Once you register, you get a code number and you can just use that.
All right.
That's good to know, Karen.
Thank you. I'll probably ask you then. Well, let me write it down
Any of
now.
you, I have to do this for River Garden, so if I can help
Right.
any of you out,
Yeah.
I'd be happy to. Yeah.
Mandarin, the senior center?
The Mandarin Senior Center on Hartley.
I'll write it down.
It's on Hartley. It's between Phillips and Old St. Augustine, isn't it? It's off of Old St. Augustine Road. Yeah, towards.
It's between Old St. Augustine and San Jose.
Are they going to
Oh, okay.
care that I don't live in Mandarin?
You have to live in Duval.
Just in Duval.
Duval
Okay.
County. They don't care. And they're open. I think part of the reason they're staying open and they haven't closed down is they're a student testing site.
So any of the kids that are getting sent over from any of the schools, they're tested.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Because I tried to get tested at CVS, one of the caregivers said to go there, but because I'm not an official caregiver, I'm not eligible to get tested there according to them.
Right. I can find them in,
What do you want?
I can find them under Mandarin Senior Center.
Yeah, go to the city website.
Karen, do you need an appointment?
You can make an appointment, but you don't have to.
Thank you.
It
Really?
opens at 11 o'clock. It's open from 11 to 7, Monday to Friday.
Is it
Thank
very
you.
crowded?
That's
when you-
really
There's no-
great
the first
information.
time I went, I was the only person there.
Okay.
Today, there were 2 other people.
All
But
right.
it's all spread out. Everybody
Trying to
has to
see
be
who's
masked.
speaking?
No, get off.
Real
Okay.
safe.
Oh, you want to
Great.
log out?
Yeah.
River Garden told me to go there, so that's.
Yeah, good to know.
Yeah, I'm signing out.
Yeah. me
Okay.
too.
Bye-bye.
I'm getting close to 4 o'clock.
Goodbye, everybody. I'll see
Bye,
you in a little
everybody.
while.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Hey, everybody. For a brief moment, I saw my wife.
I'm still here.
I did too.
There she
On
is.
page
She's in
2.
that little box down below
There
you.
you go.
I'm still here.
Yeah.
Hi, Jane. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova to you.
Janie, I will see you shortly. Assuming I'm not, if I have to stay, I'll give you a call.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Shana Tova, everybody. Take care. It was good being with you. I'm going to be shutting down now.